Welcome to Wallbreakers, a podcast by emerging creatives for emerging creatives, presented by the Digi60 Filmmakers Festival. I'm your host, Bernice Romero De Gracia, a scriptwriting graduate from Algonquin College and an emerging content creator. From one emerging creative to another, the biggest creative block is breaking into a competitive industry. How can we break down those walls and root a stable foundation for our passion? Here at Wallbreakers, we sit down with Canadian artists to chat about the challenges they face in establishing a creative career and advice they have for those who have yet to embark on this journey. In this fourth episode, I speak to Patrick Kabeya, an Ottawa-based documentary filmmaker. As a Congolese Canadian who grew up in apartheid Africa, Patrick's creative identity roots from portraying Congolese colonial and political history and Pan-African historical figures in his documentaries. He has gained recognition for 6 short documentary films and 2 feature-length documentaries, including Congo, A Political Tragedy, and From Patrice to Lumumba. As a professional in documentary film, Patrick shares his insights with me on being the masters of our own stories. Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Bernice.
Yeah, I'm so stoked to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you, me too, actually.
I wanted to start our conversation today by first asking you, because you're a documentary filmmaker, what do you think is so special about documentary film compared to traditional, fictional film or stories?
This is just my opinion. I think for me personally, I love documentaries because I just wanted to tell a story. And I thought a documentary, for me, I think growing up, I thought documentaries were real. Right, everything that was said in the documentary was real.
Yeah.
Until I started realizing, okay, there's people have their own narrative and stuff like that. But I think documentaries for me is good just to tell a story. And if you're very honest with the story you're telling, then documentary is perfect for it, right?
Yeah.
Where if it's not in a documentary form, then people will be like, well, I wonder how many things did they add to this to make the story good, whatever. When it's a documentary, I think if you're very honest with the story that you're telling, then you have an honest story, right? So that's, for me, that's why I love the documentary medium more.
That is what you think makes it stand out from traditional film?
Exactly, just the honesty in it. Again, if done well. Right, not your own opinion. Just if, for example, my films, what I did was I just wanted to tell the story.
Yeah.
Right. This is the story from here to here. I didn't make this up. This is how it is, and that's it. That's what I want to tell. Just want to tell real stories. So I think that's what makes documentaries stand out for me personally.
Yeah. Could you tell me and viewers more about your personal experiences with the documentaries that you've made?
What do you mean by my personal experiences?
How the process and how you started making it and producing it.
I think it started. It's been a process for almost 30 years. Right, it started where I loved writing. Before writing, I think I loved history or I loved writing. I don't know, one of the two.
Yeah.
Right? So I think I loved writing at the same time. I loved history. I still do, and it got to a point where I think I was about early 20s. I felt that my story wasn't told properly, or it was told by the colonizer, actually, which was the UK or France and stuff in terms of Africa or Belgium and stuff. So I was like, why are they telling our story, right? So I felt, okay, well, I want to tell my story. And from then on, I continued writing, and then I took courses here and there, went back to Algonquin, night school, just literally wanted to I don't know, I didn't want to be a documentary maker, but I just wanted to tell the story. Yeah. And I thought, I'm like, okay, well, let me try this. I started making small documentaries on the Congo. I started doing minute spots and stuff like this. So this is this province. It's got this. It's got that. Then I thought, hey, you know what? I can expand on this. And the more I was doing that, the more I thought, okay, so maybe it's my duty to do this. And then also, of course, my favorite quote from Patrice Lumumba is that Africa will one day tell its own story. So
Yeah.
I thought that was very important for me. I'm like, okay, you know what? He's talking to me. I have to tell my story. So that's basically my journey. That's how I started. That's how I got into it. And yeah, here we are.
Yeah, and the more I think about it, especially like relating it to fictional films, I don't think a film is ever truly quote unquote fictional because it's always based on someone's personal experiences or someone's ideas.
Yeah, for me, honestly, it's just they just tell our story.
Yeah.
That's all basically.
Yeah.
It's like nothing glorious. It's just I just want to tell our story in a dignified way.
Yeah.
Which is with all of the honesty, with the good, the bad, and the ugly out of it. And the good is there's bad, there's ugly, and just say it. Just tell the story, and people will appreciate it like that. So that's what really motivates me for that.
Yeah, especially with like documentary and like talking about history in particular, like people who aren't meant to take ownership over other people's narratives do exactly that. They do just that.
Yep.
They don't have the right to be able to like tell other people's stories, but because they're the ones who unfortunately like have more power over people who don't.
Exactly.
Like yeah. You seem to have some thoughts on that. Would you like to share?
No, honestly, like I just think no matter how much, let's say if I love the Philippines and everything about it, there's no way I can write something about the Philippines more than you or better than you. I can't write something about your family. I could have been your neighbor for 30 years, but I wouldn't be able to tell your family story because there's still those little secrets that, your mom told you or that your grandma or your grandpa told you. So the best person to tell your story is you, right? So I thought to me, no, I have to do this. So I have to be, I can't let somebody else tell my family story. And my family is the Congo.
Yeah.
And especially when you had a hand in the atrocities or stuff that happened in my country, right? So I'm like, no, I'm not going to let you, on one hand, have blood on your hand, and on the other hand, have pages in literature about my story. No, I don't want that. So let me tell my story. Let me talk to my grandmother.
Yeah.
Let me talk to my father. Let me talk to, all these uncles and aunties and stuff like that. Let me ask their lives, their point of view about our country and our stories and stuff. Let me ask about our culture, about our customs and stuff like that. So that's that.
Yeah.
I just don't want anybody else to. Not that maybe it comes out bad saying like I don't want anybody else to tell my story, but if I feel like other people don't have my family story at heart, the best interest of my family story.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you know what? No, you can't tell my family story. You did bad to my family. Why would you write a story about my family, right? So
exactly. Yeah, and whether it's fictional or non-fictional, you're the only one who knows knows your story. Or rather, what I'm trying to say is that nobody knows your story better than you do. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think also it depends on the interest that you have. It goes back to like, let's say we're talking earlier on like the slave narrative.
Yeah.
Right. So it's funny that the West doesn't realize that Africans also have their narrative of the slave trade.
Yeah.
Right. So we only know one narrative of it. It's like, oh well, we went there and they gave us their kids, and I'm like, no, we didn't. You took them away from us, right? So I want to tell that story. It's like what happened. There's a famous Congolese little story, which is funnily sad. It's that they thought white people used to eat their people, so they'll see these empty vessels that will come. And they'll take people, and then later on, the empty vessels will come back again with the same white people or the same white people, because they thought they all looked alike. But then our people were not there. So they're like, well, what happened? Did you guys just eat them? Because they didn't know that there was other places somewhere else. They're just like, oh my God, you guys came here, took out people and eat them. So initially, that was the storyline from our point of view. So I want to tell those stories. As funny as in French, banal, as small as it is, I still want to tell those funny little anecdotes of we thought white people were eating our people, right? So just because we didn't understand what was going on, right? So So yeah, I think it's very important to tell the story, and I think another thing that really hurts for me is that there's a lot of narrative from our point of view that said we didn't want this, but then history says to us that you sold your kin, right? So history is looking bad on those people who lost their kids and their siblings and their parents and stuff like that to the slave trade. History is saying they sold them, right? So the Western books are reading them. Well, the Africans sold their kin, so I just want to make that right.
Yeah.
Like in and not saying that there's not people that benefited from the slave trade, for example. Back then, from our point of view, from our side, there were people, but I think the majority didn't like that. So those are the kind of little things like that I want to tell.
I think I can relate to that because in terms of like my culture as a Filipino, I saw a Facebook post once about how people were like advocating against the narrative that Magellan discovered the Philippines. He was the one who discovered the Philippines, and rather the post like rewrote that caption as no, Magellan landed in the Philippines. He wasn't the one who discovered it because we had our own indigenous culture, which was, to be honest, now is almost like disregarded because we're so into that colonial mentality and that Western culture that's been instilled like in us like as a country.
Yeah, I find it's funny for us too. It's like Diego Cao discovered the Congo. No, he didn't.
No.
He landed there, exactly like that. No. And then, it's funny too because they came onto our shores, and we had our deities and we had our religions and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, they have this primitive voodoo stuff. Here's Jesus, or here's the Bible, or here's this. So it's like it's almost like erasing everything we had, and basically so that they could tell us that we had nothing before they got there, right? So those are just the stories I just want to tell, and I always feel whenever you tell those kind of stories, people always feel like you're attacking people. Like, no, you know what? This is not about you.
Yeah.
It's like, please take your ego outside. It's really not about you. It's not about France. It's not about whatever. It's about history.
Yeah.
Right. And if you feel attacked by it, then that's a you problem. I think you have to look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, why do you feel attacked by it? So I try to tell my stories as honest as possible, and I think that's the main goal for me, is just be honest so that if somebody cries about it, just shrug your shoulders and like, that's a you problem.
Yeah. And there's a lot of power that can be like found in that too, because like, when you're not being honest with your cultural narrative, you're not being honest with yourself. And that, it's really important to be able to root back to that.
It's funny because, speaking of honesty, the Congolese documentaries are doing is a 3-part series. Yeah. And so the third part, it's really taking long because there's going to be a lot of honesty in it. It talks about the 32 years of dictatorship. So at this point, I've talked about the colonizers and what they did, and I've talked about independence and what they did. Now it's like you have to literally talk about us and what we did, within our own, So there's a bit of honesty there. It's like, well, it's called greed at the cost of independence. Right, so we got independence. Now we're greedy, and look what happened. Right, so I have to be very honest with the Congolese people, whether they like this or not. This is our story, and whether people will look back and say, "Well, you guys were greedy after independence." Well, that's what happened. So I was talking to my dad. I remember before doing my interviews and stuff, just asking him questions and stuff, and he was like, "You're gonna ask that?" I'm like, "Yeah, Dad. We have to talk about this. We have to talk about that. We have to talk about that." It's like he couldn't just. I could see him looking at me like, "Huh, interesting. I thought you were going to omit that." No. We need to talk about that. You know. So So honesty is the key in documentaries for me.
Yeah, that's the thing, especially when people are so used to being silenced, like it feels foreign to them when really like it should be a right. To be able to be honest about your experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It's funny because we all have different experiences. It's I would like talking about like the black, for example, as a black Canadian, talk about the black Canadian experience and stuff like this, or like, and I realized we all have different experiences, right? As black Canadians, for example, the Caribbeans, the Africans, and the local, I guess the original loyalists and stuff like this, the original black Canadians, we all have different experiences. So even within ourselves as a black Canadians, our stories are different.
Yeah.
Right. My story as a Congolese versus other Congolese people is completely different. You know, I don't know if I mentioned that to you when we're talking. Is that I grew up in South Africa. You know, like apartheid South Africa
Yes.
as a Congolese, where my Congolese friends have their own narrative of what they lived in the Congo war and stuff like that. I never went through that. Right. We left long before that, moved to South Africa, so had a different war, if you want to put it, you know, where it was like I saw like a white entrance, black entrance and stuff like that. So it's like I had a different story there. So yeah, so we're all different. Let's tell our story. Let's tell our story with pride and stuff. So that's really what I want to do. Just be honest with the story. That's the key. Just keep that honesty in the story.
Yeah. I know that we talked about this the first time that we met, but some people might be, or viewers might be curious to know about what your family's personal experiences are. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I come from my grandfather. Apparently, my dad always says my grandfather would have been proud of me. And he said that once just casually, and I just had tears in my eyes. And like we're having a conversation. He said, you know, your grandfather would have been so proud of you. You just like him. And I guess he cared a lot about his culture and stuff like that. I grew up in a home where unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know how you want to put it, where I had we talked about Yasser Arafat, we talked about Nelson Mandela, we talked about Lumumba and stuff like that, Martin Luther King and stuff. So this is the kind of house I grew up in, where our dinner table was just we were we're encouraged to have this conversation and stuff. So politically, I've always been taught to speak up. If anything, to make sure that your opinion, you know, like nobody else speaks up for you. If I remember my mom once telling us just a little thing, and I told my daughters as well in school, don't ever let other kids get you in trouble. If you're gonna get in trouble by yourself. You know, stand up, speak for yourself. You know, don't be part of the crew. You know, and just say those people got in trouble and they got suspended. No. Be the leader. If you're gonna get suspended by your own mouth. You know.
Yeah.
So I think that's helped me, and also has maybe not helped me, because sometimes I realize I have a big mouth, so sometimes I feel like I can't just hold it. But that comes from my family, so that's the kind of family I grew up in, and I was encouraged to ask questions, encouraged to question things. So I don't know if that was a question, but yeah, that's my family experience. And then, so we're from the Congo. Both my parents are Congolese. I was born in the Congo. My dad worked. So South Africa, for those that don't know, was going through apartheid at the time, and I think was it WHO wanted black doctors to work with black Africans in South Africa, because a lot of the black Africans were they had a distrust of the white doctors and stuff like that. So my dad was one of those people that ended up going to South Africa to work with the black populations there. So probably the best decision for me personally, because I think it allowed me to see the world very differently, to live a different, just to see the world differently, you know, to appreciate my privilege. I appreciate, I was this privileged black kid living in suburban white South Africa during the apartheid, where blacks are like, what are you doing there? Who are you? You must be like an informant, basically. And whites are like, who are you? How dare you live here? How can you guys afford this, right? So it was always like that, where in school, people just look at you and stuff. And so I look back, I think that's what made me who I am today. So I'm very comfortable navigating around race topics and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
That's my family. And then we moved to Canada. So
Yeah.
I've been here longer than anywhere else, but I feel I'm thankful for that South Africa part.
Yeah. And I don't know if like you've ever experienced, I guess, this kind of imposter syndrome when it comes to your not just your Congolese but also your Canadian like
Yeah.
background, like, oh, like I want to stay true to my Congolese roots, but like me and my family rather, like our experience is also rooted in North American or Western culture, and just like I guess kind of that mental battle that you have. Like, have you ever like experienced that where, I'm trying to root back to my culture, but here I am in a country outside of my own?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think every day, I realize I'm a third cultured kid. So, born into one culture and have two other cultures and stuff. I feel comfortable around South Africa because that's where I did elementary school, my entire elementary school, and the first 2 years of high school, 3 years of high school. So I feel that's where I'm more comfortable with the Congolese. Within the Congolese community, I'm an imposter. Where they'll always tell me like, well, you're not Congolese enough. We can tell you, yeah, you're Congolese, but they'll be like, well, you're born here. You're definitely not born in the Congo, right?
Yeah.
So, and South Africans also know that I'm not South African enough, so they'll still tell you that. Canadians are the only ones that have never made me feel differently, but I'm the one who feels differently.
Yeah.
Like Canadians have never. I swear, I always feel very comfortable, very Canadian as can be. Whenever I travel back into Canada, I'm like, oh, I'm home.
Yeah.
I feel good about it, but it's just me, myself. I feel maybe I'm not Canadian enough, right? I remember actually, it's been about 15 years ago, those years of Twitter, of me just arguing with people on Twitter. And somebody once told me, and I claimed I was Canadian, and somebody told me, but your grandparents didn't build Canada. And that, I've never forgotten that. I was like, ooh. I mean, this was Twitter beef, right? So it's all good, but it stuck with me, right? So I was like, okay, well, I can't claim Canada like that, right?
Yeah.
So although I tell my daughters too, this is who they are, right? They were born here, that's them. But for me personally, I feel 100% Congolese. I feel that Congolese always remind me that I'm not 100% Congolese somehow, even though I am. I feel 100% Canadian. I feel 100% South African. It depends on like the sports that I love. It's from the Commonwealth, from South Africa. So I'm still into the cricket, the rugby, and stuff like this. The music that I like is maybe North American, like from the rap and stuff like this. And I also still love my Congolese culture. But me as an individual, I think that's a Congolese kid. Right,
Yeah.
But that's how I feel, at least, right? So so there's that battle all the time, trying to figure out who you are. But I've accepted that this is who I am. I've accepted my my privilege as an African kid. It's in terms of imposter syndrome. I find I have more the privilege syndrome. Privilege imposter syndrome. I don't know how to privilege syndrome. I don't know how to say it. I feel my privilege as an African kid hurts me somehow. I don't know why. I just feel like why was that privilege? Well, 95% of the continent, all those kids would have loved to be in my situation where they'll just yeah. So I don't know. It's weird.
It definitely is. Yeah.
It is. But like I said, I'm okay with it. I'm okay because I've accepted this is my life. This is not, I can't make anything. I can't erase it. Right. This is my life.
The reason why I asked that is because, like, again, I relate to that because I told you that English is my first language, even if I'm a Filipino. And it's actually not because I was raised outside of the Philippines. I was born and raised in the Philippines until I was around 6, but with the English language because my parents, especially my mother, always like from the very beginning, she had that vision for me that I want my daughter to be able to live abroad, to have like a better future abroad, and I'm gonna raise her in English because I don't want her to struggle with like speaking to other people in English. So that's why like I'm so comfortable with speaking the language, but at the same time, it's made me feel so displaced, especially like I'm not fluent in Tagalog, which is the native language of the Philippines, and like I don't know, it's weird because I'm not necessarily like I'm not a child of a Filipino American or Canadian like immigrant family, but I kind of feel like one because because I I can't talk like in Tagalog with like my fellow like Filipinos who are around the same age as me, but at the same time there's kind of like that community like in the or like that kind of like group in the Philippines, social group where children are raised with the English language, and like it's just a really weird place to be in. It's just, like I don't feel fully Filipino, but at the same time I wasn't born and raised outside of the country. Yeah.
That's interesting for you. I mean, that's the first thing as soon as you told me that, I was like, no, you're not. I'm like, what do you mean? You speak like you were born here. But I do have the same thing where I speak out of the 4 major languages of the Congo. I speak 3 of them. But all 3 of them, I speak them with a thick accent. They basically say to me that I speak like, they call it in French, de mon père, so the fathers, which were the priests, the Catholic priests,
Yes.
the European Catholic priests who came, and they'll learn our local languages. Yeah. So it's like a diss to a local, Congolese, to be told that you speak like one of those priests, those Irish priests and stuff like that. But yeah, like I understand 3 of the languages. One very good because my mom and dad always spoke in our language to them, to each other. So we all picked it up, but we speak with a thick accent. They'll catch us right there. Like if I go back home, I remember in 2019, I went back to South Africa actually, and I always claimed to be African. That's I think my badge of honor. I always tell, hey, I'm from Africa. I'm an African guy. I went back and just got to Ethiopia actually, and I was just like, oh my God, I'm so Canadian. I was like, it's just like all the chaos is just like, and the African chaos, which is great. That's what I was looking for. But I realized I was just a Western boy at that point. I was like, oh man, I've been claiming this, right? So the language is gone. My grandmother moved to Canada a couple of years ago, and I remember even talking to my grandmother. My mom has to be there, in terms of intimate, because the way we've spoken to my mom, my parents, is that they speak to us in our language. We reply in French or English in our language. So it became one of those, like, we speak like a franglais to them, in when they speak to us in our language. So there's a lot of things where we add a lot of French words where my grandma doesn't. So when my grandma came, and she'll just say things like stuff like a plate. Like, I'll call it like assiette, like in French, right? I'll just use a French word or an English word, or she'll just call it something else. I'm like, oh, this actually has a word, So, but there's a lot of things like that where you realize, yes, you've lost. And then my kids, for example, my wife is Congolese as well, but she wasn't born in the Congo. So my kids don't speak, and I feel bad for them, right? So one day they asked me, Dad, why don't we speak Congolese? I'm like, well, Congolese is not a language, first of all. So, but yeah.
Everything that you're talking about is just like so intriguing to me because I have that such a personal like connection to it. And with the way that you portray that in like in your documentaries in particular, like how do you think documentary film can be a way to let people see things like in your perspective or like through your eyes? Because what you're seeing like on a camera, for example, is like your blank canvas, but the lens itself or the camera itself is what you're seeing. So how does that like come through in your work?
For me, it's so far because my documentaries are historical. It's basically what's said The people that I have in my documentaries. It's not what I'm seeing, more mainly like what they're saying.
Okay.
Right. So for historical documentary, like for example, was the Lumumba documentary. I had one of the people talking was a 20-year-old student back then, back in 1960. So it was just like I remember the interview was just like put the camera on them, tell me about that day, right, and it just lit up, right. So for me, it's really what they're saying, and of course, I can see how if my documentaries were not historical. Yes, the visuals have to because documentaries also sound like a something where you have to. It's almost the B rolls and stuff are very important as well, right?
Yeah.
So the footage is like almost every footage you put on the screen is very important. So I find for me it's really what's been said, which is important than the visuals.
Yeah. But have you been able to play with like cinematography too, like with your documentaries?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Especially for I do have. I had one where I really enjoyed one piece, one segment I really enjoyed working on, where subject one was talking about their experience of the day, and then I had the day itself being played out on live. I guess with the live TV from back then. Subject two talk about their experience, and so I kind of mixed three people and the newsreel together, and I thought that little 4 or 5 minute segment was so good for me in terms of editing, but in terms of cinematography, no, not because again it's sit down interview.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this, and then let's put images in the back. So
Yeah. But that's really interesting. Like there's still things that you can there's still a lot more like to explore with the way you portray
yes, it's all in
things.
the editing, right? That I
Yeah.
find for me, it's how do you play with people's emotions? How do you make them realize that this is an important moment?
Yeah.
How do you make them cry?
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So it's choosing the right music, choosing the right vibe for it, and yeah. So I enjoy that part of the editing process. Actually, it's it's funny because I'm in my basement there, I'm editing. Sometimes I can just scream, yes, this is, and I'll play it, and I'll just like text my wife to come downstairs. Come here. Can you watch this? And she just walks in there. Okay, so doesn't get what I'm excited about, but yeah. So for me, it's in the editing.
I have student experience with like making a documentary before because me and my classmates, we needed to make a documentary for an actual like documentary making class back in my undergrad program, and it's especially writing a script like as a script writing student, it's so much more different than when you're just writing like a fictional script, because nothing's really set in stone until you actually start shooting. Once you're into the production process, and you really have to be able to hone your eye to be mindful all of the time, to be on time with getting the perfect moment, right? Yeah.
Mind you, for me, I've there's a lot of things I've learned, especially with my full length, is that I almost now write with footages in my head. So when I'm writing especially the historical thing, I almost know what's out there already. So I'm like, okay, well,
Yeah.
I can't talk about. I would love to talk about this topic, but there's just not a lot of, like, let's say, footages to go with it, like B-rolls to go with it, or interviews to go with it, or okay, I'll just let this one go, right? So I write a lot. My second one, I wrote it. I was almost editing it in my head as I was doing the research, as I was writing it. I almost knew exactly how it was going to be. I was just reading the letter once. Lumumba had his last letter to his wife just before he got killed. He had like one of the guards who smuggled it just before he got killed. And when I was reading that letter once, and I'm like, oh my God, I'd love to do a film like I was actually talking about a short film. I love to do a short film on this letter. And the more I read the letter, I was like, you know what? And I've read that letter so many times. It was just like a random thing I was researching. And I said to myself, this letter basically tells this guy's whole story, his whole career. Because it's like he knows he's about to get killed. So he's writing to his wife saying, listen, everything I did it for this, for the people, blah, blah, blah. Let my kids know this. And I was like, I can actually use that letter and do a documentary on it and just reverse back. So that's how it started. And then, so every time when I was writing, I was editing. When I was reading and writing, I was editing it in my head. So I would like write things and just like in bracket, okay, here, I'm going to end this interview. I'm going to interview somebody. I'm going to ask this question and that question. So
Yeah.
So I enjoy that process, actually.
With my personal experience with making that short documentary with group mates, like it was mainly about the like stay-in nanny of one of my group mates, and she's been with their family for years, for a very long time. It's just part of Filipino culture where when you have a stay-in nanny that lives with you for so long, they practically become like part of your family, right? But the challenging thing, like for that group mate in particular, is because she lived with her like 24/7. Like we always had to tell her to, like just keep on shooting. Like you have to be mindful because you never know if something interesting is gonna happen. You always have to have your camera on you and just like be mindful of those kinds of things. And like I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, like with making documentaries, like finding those key moments and those highlights without forcing them all the time.
Yeah, it's funny as you say without forcing. I'm hoping to finish a documentary this summer. It's been shooting it in Europe for the past since 2017. Like basically, it's a documentary on my mother-in-law. So the timing is never right. It's like, okay, you know what? Can we sit for an interview? We start the interview, then somebody shows up. I'm like, oh my God, can we do this? So we've been literally I think since 2017, I've gone there 3 times, and I'm going back again this summer, and I'm hoping to finish it this summer. It's just like the timing is never right. So it's like, just follow her around. Like 1 year, I just followed her around the whole 3 weeks I was there. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna follow her around. The last 3 days, we're gonna do an interview. Never happened. So I'm like, I have all this B-rolls, all this footages and stuff. I just need the main interview now, the sit-down interview. So I'm hoping to do it this year. So
yeah,
the timing is never right.
Yeah. There's so many things to consider when making a documentary, and just claiming ownership and being masters of our own stories, right? And the most important thing still to consider in all of that is the honesty. Like we keep on talking about being honest, but some people are just too scared to do that.
Then don't do it.
Yeah.
No, honestly, like if you're too scared to tell a story, then don't tell the story.
Yeah.
Don't tell that story because clearly you're not ready to tell that story. Because, right, if I'm going to tell a story and restrict myself because I feel like, you know what, I'm not ready for people to know that this is my opinion, this is where I stand, and stuff like that, then I won't say it. I was I know it's going to be a little just political. I was very happy when South Africa stood up for Palestine, because I lived in South Africa when Mandela came out, and when Mandela was talking about Yasser Arafat and the PLO and the Palestinian, what they did. And I know exactly what they did. So for me, when that happened, I was like, yes, thank you for telling the world. We've been saying this for years, right? So if you're not ready to tell, and I've always said it to people, like, why I stand with Palestine, because I'm South African.
Yeah.
And a lot of people never understood what that meant until this year. So I'm like, stand with, if you have nothing to say, don't say it, right? If you say something, if you have a story to say it. Don't be restricted. Be very honest. Yeah, don't be restricted. If you're restricted, don't say it. That's my thing.
Yeah. It's interesting that you point that out, because I don't know. I might be a little controversial about this, but
It's okay.
just with, especially with the whole like with our digital culture right now, people are always so pressed about you needing to have an opinion and express that and express your side on things. But I think it's really interesting that you point out that if you're not ready to talk about it yet, then just don't talk about it. Yeah.
My sister actually once, a long time ago, actually, her son actually just turned 16 yesterday. Her son would have been 2 years old or something. My nephew was like 2 years old, and I was working on something, and my sister was annoying me or wanted me to hang out with her or something. I told her, listen, this is very important, whatever. And I'm like, you need to teach this to your son. And she says to me, no, that's not my job. That's your job. When he's going to grow up, he's going to come to you because he knows, because you are the one who's into that, right? So I appreciated that from her because she was like, this is not my thing. This is your thing, right? So she's not going to go out there and talk about something where she feels she doesn't feel comfortable. So we'll just send them to her brother, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not comfortable talking about hockey as a sport. So why will I go out there and have a podcast and talk about the NHL, right? Or the NFL, for example. I'm not qualified to do that. So why should I talk about that? Let me talk about soccer, or let me talk about cricket or rugby that I know. And
Yeah.
I'm very comfortable in those topics, right? So there's no pressure, when going back to not dissing anything, but when the Super Bowl is on, I have no pressure to go online and say, oh, watching the Super Bowl with my boys. I have really no pressure on doing that, right? Because it's just not my thing, right? And I'm not looking for points for that, right? So if you have no, and the pressure, sometimes what happens, like we end up talking about things we don't even know about, don't understand what it is, right? Just because we're so pressured to say, oh, free Palestine or stuff like this. Like, do you understand what you're saying, or do you understand what's going on? It's like, oh, no, right? So don't just be honest with who you are and what you stand for, and
That's the main thing that I wanted to highlight, is because some people just talk without really educating themselves on things just for the sake of having an opinion and saying like, oh, I stood up for this cause, or I stood up for that, I spoke out about this topic, but they don't have a very informed opinion about it. And they just, I think it's that's something that we need to highlight more, is to educate ourselves more about things before we even talk about them.
Yeah, it's very. I think it's liberates you as well, right? Because for me personally, it's more like one thing I did find here in North America, for example, you have every elections, especially the states, and here there's always like the swing states and people that don't know who they're voting for, and I'm just like, what do you mean? It's ideologies. I'm like, I have ideologies. I stand for this. I stand against this. So whether it's A or B or C running for that party, this is my ideology. I'm never gonna, So I always find that weird when people. That's just me. It's just a me thing there when people flip flop, for example, and things like that. I'm like, well, I thought political parties, for example, were about what you believe, what you stand for, and stuff like this. What do you mean? Last year, these people were saying they didn't like immigrants, and this year you're like, oh, I think I'm with them. How does that work, right? So make up your mind, right? So I find it's the same thing as that. Like if you don't know what you're talking about, just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
It's I'd rather somebody who's quiet about something than I never know where you stand, right? Like I'd rather not knowing where you stand on a thing than you just open your mouth and just being ridiculous about it.
Say whatever.
Right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh man. Right. So yeah.
Yeah. Considering everything that we've talked about, and again being the masters of our own stories, there's especially as an emerging creative, we're coming into this industry wanting to show people what we're capable of, but at the same time there's still that tendency to please those who are at a higher position than us, and feeding into, or rather submitting to, the commercial needs of a project and everything. So like, what is your advice on like I guess, staying true to our stories.
Be honest what you do, why you're doing it.
Yeah.
For me, the reason I'm doing it again, like, goes back to my favorite quote, Africa will one day tell its story. So if everyone in this room right now writes a story on the Congo, not only on Africa, on the Congo, I'll be so happy. Like, oh my God, that's amazing. That's exactly what the end goal is. My end goal is really to tell our story, right?
Yeah.
Historical story, to be the masters of our narrative. Now, in terms of whatever come the commercial and stuff like that comes with it, oh my God, that's amazing. I never knew that I'll do all these festival runs and I'll be on TV5 and stuff. That was never my goal or ambition. And I think if you stick to why you're doing what you're doing, then like I really don't look at the other side of the thing. I just remember why I'm doing this. The little kid in me is doing this for that child who was like 10 years old asking about like the Roman Empire and stuff like this and the Zulu Kingdom. That same kid, that's who I'm doing it for, right? I don't care about anything else. And then I also realized with my work is that do something out of your heart and do it well, and things will happen for you.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not there searching for fanfare. I literally just be honest with why you're doing something. Now, if you're doing it because you want to reach the stars and you want to go to Hollywood and stuff, and there's no problem. There's no, just be honest with it, right? And there's no problem. I love everybody's journey. I'll support everybody's journey. But in terms of me, more people that do what I'm doing, the merrier. I think we can all work together if we all have the same goal, right?
Yeah.
And then just cheer each other on, with that same goal. It's like, oh, you wrote a story about Nigeria. Wonderful. I wrote the story about Botswana. Amazing. And you wrote the story about Philippines. And in all that, we're all telling our stories.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's the goal.
Yeah. So. Again, we were talking about this, but just that, that feeling or need to compete with people. But, we're all here in this industry because we're all passionate about what we do. And it's so important to remember to cheer each other on.
I think I have this fear where I never want anybody to feel that I'm competing with them, right? And because I'm not. And it's not, it might come out cocky, like I'm not competing with anyone, but I'm not really, right? I'm cheering people on. Because I think I know what I want to do in this game.
Yeah.
If you're gonna put it like that in this game. So there's no need for me to compete with somebody. And even if there is, like I was saying earlier on, for example, like let's say in Ottawa, some Congolese people they didn't have the same path as me.
Yeah.
Right. So I can't even compete with them because their story would be like, oh, we left during war and stuff like this, and I'm like, oh, I don't have that, right? So how can I compete with that?
Yeah.
And then I'll be talking about apartheid. How can they compete with that? So there's no need to compete. We can just share our stories together and be like, oh my God, this is great. You had this, I had this, the Nigerians had this, the Cameroonian had this, and this is the story of our people, of Africa, and let's just be honest with our story and let's cheer each other on, and the more the merrier. We need to make sure that the next generation have. I just want to make sure, like when somebody goes on YouTube or something, they'll be able to find Congolese stories as well, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it. There's no, and then when you compete as well, it just becomes like this dog-eat-dog world, which I'm not. Like I'm really not into that. It destroys my purpose, and I think maybe derails me from my purpose.
Yeah.
My purpose. I think I was telling you, if I could live a long life, my goal would be to make 53 documentaries, 54 now because of South Sudan, 54 documentaries on Africa. So basically each country, and if I meet people around the way doing the same thing, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Let's leave our footprint on digital footprint on online about our stories and stuff. So let's not compete. Like we all have different stories. There's no way my story will be the same as another Congolese person, right? Unless you're my sibling or something, but there's just no way we're gonna have the same story. Let's tell our stories together. Even as siblings, even within my family, there's 5 kids, and we all have different. Like looking back now, we're like all different.
Yeah.
Right. So same mom, same dad, but we all, different attitude, different path, different ways of thinking and stuff like that. But same household, same table that raised me basically. So yeah.
You've had such an empowering journey, and I'm sure like it's helped you like know more about yourself too. So I like to end every episode by asking my guest to imagine being face to face with your younger self, the version of yourself that first started on this creative journey. What is it that you want to tell them now that you're here in the stage of your life?
I'll tell you, you're gonna be all right. No, honestly, I'll tell that person maybe I would have gone earlier to tell them to start earlier than I did. I think I did software engineering in school, but at that time I wish I had gone straight to TV and broadcasting or something, or documentaries, just something to do with just to learn quickly, faster.
Yeah.
I wasted a lot of time where I was just like, do I do it? Do I not? Do I do it? Do I not? And then next thing you know, it's 5 years later. So I would tell him, you're going to be fine. And then just start earlier. Yeah. And don't be discouraged.
Yeah.
Right. There's been a lot of, you tell people, I've told a lot of people over the years what I want to do. And some people discourage me about it. Right. So just don't be discouraged. So yeah.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
You have so much knowledge and stuff, and like
knowledge, no.
Yeah, no, like for real, and just I'm sure that like people are going to be and feel so empowered to just be like their most authentic self after
I hope
hearing
so.
what you
Yeah.
said.
Thank you so much. I really hope people can feel authentic, by listening to me. I think that's what I want people to know about me. Just like this is me. This is what I'm about. I'm about telling my story, making sure that everybody around me is comfortable in me telling my story, and make sure that they know that me telling my story has nothing to do with them. So that's thank you for having me. This was great to remember some stuff I even forgot myself, so that's great.
Thank you for engaging with us in this episode. To learn more about Digi60, visit us at digi60.org. Till next time, keep on emerging, and I'll see you on the other side of the wall.